Now, there's an old Irish joke. I think I'm allowed to do it as I am a Dolan. A man is lost and asks an Irishman called Paddy for directions. The Irishman replies, "Well, if I were you, I wouldn't start from here." And Paddy is right. After our wild 2.5-year experiment in communism, in which we shut down the country and the economy in a failed bid to stop a nasty but mild for most respiratory virus, Britain is broke. Worth noting that Starmer and Reeves, in opposition, called for more of those ruinous COVID measures. So yes, this government has inherited a Tory mess, but in some ways they co-own this nightmare as well. And the one great truth about this country that Rachel Reeves is unlikely to acknowledge at the end of the month is that Britain lives beyond its means, with public spending now representing almost half of our national income, when it was 35% 2 decades ago. More money is going into public services with worse outcomes, whether it's policing, the NHS or education. So the right approach would be a drastic reduction in the size of the state, wage restraint and unprecedented spending cuts, perhaps upwards of £35 billion. Instead, the Chancellor is said to be considering extra taxes of £35 billion. Why? Well, because the cuts Britain needs are politically impossible for a party that has promised the public sector a huge cash bonanza, or to use that snake oil word that they love so much, investment. What we need is not just unprecedented cuts, but a vast reduction in taxes too, to boost national income, to pay for great public services and to reduce the debt, the interest of which alone is currently costing us £100 billion a year. Now, the Chancellor may fiddle the fiscal rules in order to borrow further billions. What's that going to do? Saddle future generations with an even bigger bill. And whilst they promised that taxes on working Brits would not go up, a predicted £12 billion hike in national insurance contributions from businesses is exactly that. The very impressive Tina McKenzie from the Federation of Small Businesses said hiking small firms' tax is a recipe for cuts to pay, hours and jobs. Meanwhile, the Institute for Fiscal Studies says raising employer national insurance contributions is effectively a tax on the earnings of working people. A feared £5 billion hike in fuel duty is another tax rise on working people. Ask anyone with a van or folk who have to drive to work or take their kids to school. And it will hurt small businesses in particular, who are already struggling. 600,000 firms are currently said to be on the verge of collapse. The Adam Smith Institute now fear that the tax rate on the non-DOMs, disgracefully introduced by the Tories, may cost the country £6.5 billion over the next decade in lost jobs, growth and investment, rather than raising anything. And a record 10,000 millionaires are expected to leave the country this year alone. How rich people with all their spending power leaving Britain helps the poor is anyone's guess. And so much for Rachel Reeves' imaginary £22 billion black hole, which is proving as elusive as the Loch Ness Monster. It was fishy from the start. First of all, we know that contested figure could be almost halved if she hadn't forked out £9 billion for inflation-busting pay rises for the likes of junior doctors and train drivers. And now there's talk of boosting spending by a further £40 billion altogether. Now, some of that will be for infrastructure, and that is a good thing. But billions will be there to fund Ed Miliband's wild net zero experiment, which involves betting the house on flaky renewables. Not to mention a cash splurge on an already failing and bloated public sector. Now, there have been times when we have needed a Labour government. But with the country crying out for low taxes, fiscal restraint and business-led growth, now is not one of them. I don't know about you, but I am dreading the October Halloween budget. It will be tricks and treats and an utter horror show. Your reaction, gbnews.com/your say. I'll get to your messages shortly, but first, tonight's top pundits, I'm delighted to have journalist and broadcaster Linda Jubilee, Conservative peer Lord Coulvier Ranger, and former top Labour Minister Bill Rammell. Bill, great to see you. Great to see all three of you, by the way. Bill, are you worried about this Halloween budget?
No, because I think there are going to be some sensible, needed decisions. I mean, firstly, this government has had an awful inheritance from the Tories. There is a 22 billion black hole. To take just one example, the costs of asylum hotels are about 50 times more than the Home Office budgeted for this year. Secondly...
How's Labour's effort to stop the boats going then?
We're making progress.
Are numbers down?
They're down on 2 years ago. The overall numbers are down, and we're hugely speeding up removals from this country, which is what is needed. But secondly, and I disagree with you, Mark, that, you know, the public sector is awash with money. Baked into the Tory spending plans were impossible spending projections, which would have led to huge cuts in local government, in social care, and so much more. We're having to tackle that. Unfunded promises like new hospitals and defence spending. Mm-hmm. Alongside that, people voted for change. They voted for more investment in public services. That's what Labour is having to grapple with. Now, we're not going to go back on the commitment not to raise personal taxes for working people. I think there will be moves to make the wealthier pay more, and I think there will be a sensible tweaking of the fiscal rules, which actually economists on both the right and the left are calling for, and that will help us to move forward and start rebuilding the country.
Coulvier, are you satisfied with that answer?
No, not really. We could put a pin in the inheritance of the economy for Labour, because the challenges were there, and what they inherited was an economy that was growing, and the promises that were being made were going to be delivered from growth. So the objective of any government is to engineer growth in its economy so that they can pay for the promises they're about to deliver. Now, the challenge for this Labour government, and Mark, you were saying there's times for a Labour government. I think there's times for a new Labour government, the one we had in '97, with a Chancellor who was extremely adaptable and capable of understanding how to manage the economy.
I don't think that was what the Tories said at the time.
Well, actually, yes, but the Tories weren't in any fit state at that point to deal with it.
Now.
But the point now is that we have to have a government that looks at how does it continue to be sensible with engineering growth and rejigging, as people have said, fiscal rules that I don't think are being welcomed by economists from either sides. Because if the OECD, if the OBR all look at this and say, right, we're going to look at investment, government spending as investment and take that off the balance sheet, the bond markets aren't going to react well to that. They're going to quickly see through it. And the cost of this government and this country's borrowing is going to go up. And our debt levels are going to go up. And the cost to us to pay for this debt is going to go up. So there is no magic bullet in that route.
Can the Chancellor justify any more borrowing or any more spending, Linda?
No, and I think that already the problems unusually have started weeks before this budget has been announced. And what that's done in the mismanagement of the communication of it is it has led to a terrible, terrible dive in public confidence before any announcement has even been made. What worries me about this budget, and I do worry about the absence of non-doms and the really wealthy bracket who can fund investment.
10,000 millionaires this year leaving the country. Yeah, how does that help poor people?
Well, it doesn't. But
it makes lefties feel good about themselves for some reason.
Maybe. But one of my bigger concerns is what we would call, and it's a bit of a cliche, the squeeze middle. Tim McKenzie quite rightly pointed out that actually, you know, I think to paraphrase Napoleon, we are a nation of shopkeepers. We are a nation of small businesses. We need to get on top of the tax provision for those businesses, because if we don't, and if we stop the aspirational part of society, which is the squeeze middle, then we are heading for trouble, because we will lose momentum, and once we lose momentum, we'll lose ambition. And Bill, that's a vicious circle.
You are a very clever man, OK, and you're a very decent man as well. I don't think you're buying into this latest Labour project. OK, I think you've got far too much common sense. I think you're like one of those Church of England vicars that doesn't actually believe in God, OK? And I think that you would back a new Labour approach to the economy, which is to cut taxes, to boost national income and reduce spending and stick to Tory spending plans. Don't you think that's the way forward?
Do you know, Mark, I'm New Labour to my core, but actually these are different times and different circumstances, and you need a new approach. You talk about cutting taxes. I think this budget will be laying the foundation so later in the Parliament we can start to cut personal taxes for working people, and I think that will be the right thing to do. The argument around poor communications is one that I would wholly accept. I think the communications in the first 3 months of this government have been poor. When you're in government, you need to be explaining day to day what you're doing, why you're doing it, and how you're doing it. And that's not been done effectively. With the change of personnel that we've seen recently, I think that will start to happen. And what we've got to make clear is the way through this budget, we're delivering for working people. I think there's a difference of opinion on this sofa. I actually think the vast majority of people do want more investment in public services, and that's in part why Labour was elected, and we've got to deliver on.
I think I agree with Bill that this budget will show a direction of travel for this government, but it will show the public that what a Labour government that they haven't had since the mid-70s does when it comes to the economy. And that's what people are going to understand from this budget.
OK, well, look, folks, do you feel lied to by this Labour government? We were told that taxes wouldn't go up, certainly on ordinary working people, but many would argue that national insurance contributions from businesses will ultimately cost jobs and pay rises. Let me know your thoughts. gbnews.com/your say.